opinion.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
Dwight, allow me to introduce you, if that's all right.
Okay.
All right. So Dwight is somebody who comes with a lot of a vast amount of experience, of course, but also some very interesting stories, particularly the one with the swans, which I would love if Dwight is able to share with everybody today, as he shares with a lot of us and has shared previously as well. So I came across Dwight during a leadership program that Dwight was conducting for LGBT people. And this is called the Leading with Pride program. And it was one of the most, how do I say, internally focused programs that I've attended, which urges you to go deeper within yourself and find out things about yourself. So it's a very interesting program of self-discovery, and clearly Dwight has put his heart into curating what all sessions to have, and I'm sure that it's gone through some transformation over the last few years. But that's how I know Dwight, and Dwight has been trying to do a lot of things in India, as well as some other countries, as far as I remember you mentioning once, right? But a lot of this work has begun from India, and I'm sure that Dwight has some very interesting insights into how different this work is between the Western counterpart and the Indian counterpart. But between all of that introduction, Dwight, if I've missed anything, please feel free to add. And I warmly welcome you on behalf of everybody who's watching on YouTube or in the Zoom chat or will be watching this later. A very warm welcome to PanACEa 2021.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I have a screen with all of your pictures and who's attending on this side, and I have my PowerPoint on that side, so I'll be looking back and forth a little bit. And I get tired of looking at myself here. So let me share my screen. Well, before I share my screen, let me just say, because of the size of the group, I'm really excited that we have this size of the group. You can ask questions all along. What my intent is, or kind of the general flow is, I'd like to start out talking about basically the business case for diversity and inclusion. I have a little bit different, sometimes different perspective on how that works. I like to work from the inside out, why it's important to decisions and why it's important to individuals, and have then work out to be how that translates into diversity and inclusion policy. So I'll spend some time talking about that. I have some statistics to show you. And then at the end, or at least at the end, towards the end of the first hour, I'll say, let's take a break, if that's okay, and come back. And then we'll talk about the leadership question. We'll talk about who, how you as a LGBTQIA ally or other unique individual can be a powerful leader. So with that, I think I'll start by showing my PowerPoints. Let's see if I can make this happen. One second. Right, and then I need to share my desktop, which I think I have to do first. So just excuse me a second. All right, here we go. Okay, now you should be able to see the front line of or the front slide of a PowerPoint, right?
Yes, we are.
There is it. Okay, you see my gorgeous picture. I won't, I don't normally tell everybody, but this is a small group, so I'll tell you that that picture is just a little bit old. It's not from today.
That's surprising.
It's not from today, let's just say. So the general here is, topic is, what is the business case for diversity and inclusion? And I'll start using a summary from the Harvard Business Review that is in their foreword of one of their latest diversity and inclusion reports, that basically just says, decades worth of studies show that a diverse workforce measurably improves decision-making, problem-solving, creativity, innovation, and flexibility. So multiple dimensions on how an organization performs or outperforms, or diverse organization outperforms a uniform or homogeneous organization. I think there's also a lot of data that talks about retention and talks about attraction as also being key areas that are affected by diversity and inclusion. Just to relate some other data, World Economic Forum and the Korn Ferry Institute have done a recent study. 25 to 36% more likely to outperform in profitability. These are companies that are widely diverse and have strong diversity and inclusion policies, meaning policies and programs that are implemented and tracked and measured. Those are 25 to 36% more likely to outperform in profitability. A 20% higher rate of innovation, and I have some more stats to in just a minute. 19% higher innovation revenues, 30% greater ability to spot and reduce business risks. This is a key one that we'll talk about. Statistically significant higher retention and engagement, which we've talked about. This was presented in June of 2020 World Economic Forum. The graph here summarizes something that I think has to be mentioned, is that diverse groups, diverse teams take time to build. You really are transforming people's view of themselves. You're transforming people's view of each other. And sometimes that takes time, and that definitely takes an investment and a targeted effort from the leaders. Doesn't always have to be top down way the best and most impactful way to do it, but individual managers who want to make diversity and inclusion an important part of their specific teams can make certain things that are very impactful. So there's a question from Rudala. I'll probably not say your name right, so jump in and correct me, because I wouldn't want anybody else to mispronounce it, because I don't pronounce it right. But there's a really good question from Maruda. Do you want to say it out loud, or do you want me to read it from the chat? Okay. All right. I'll go ahead. So there's a question about, is there a correlation between ethics and integrity of a company and diversity and inclusion? I don't know the answer to that. I don't have the empirical data here that would show that. I just haven't researched it. I haven't looked for it. My gut feeling is that they're very much related. Diversity and inclusion certainly has a very strong component about the ethical treatment of people, and that would probably translate to overall ethics, but I don't have that data here. It's a good question, thank you. I wanted to just comment a little bit more about the transformation. Is that if you know what this shows, and there's other studies to show that if you just suddenly say, I'm going to be diverse, and you go out and hire a big diverse team and then just put them together and do not invest in culture, and you don't invest in the systems and processes that reinforce diversity as a value, then there's conflict. And there's usually conflict at the beginning, but if you don't, regardless, but if you don't invest in that transformation, you don't invest in that culture, you don't invest in that effort to broaden people's minds and have them understand the importance of it, then that conflict will stay. And so in order to make your company and your organization fully enjoy the benefits of diversity and inclusion, there is an investment in culture that has to happen, an investment in processes. If you're stating that diversity and inclusion is important, you need to make sure that you reward people in some way based upon diversity and inclusion. That diversity and inclusion is included in performance reviews, whatever form they take or don't take. That you have continual messages by both verbal and nonverbal from your leadership. And eventually you need to have visibility in who gets promoted and who has senior visible positions that reinforce those values. Okay. So another approach I'd like to quote some statistics from is a group called Open for Business. They are a consortium of some influential consulting companies and others that are convinced that economic growth globally is based upon the inclusion of LGBTQIA people and others. And so they created this group called Open for Business that does research and publishes reports about the economic impact of diversity and inclusion to societies. So if you like logarithms, this is a logarithm chart, but it shows a correlation between innovation, on attracting talent and skills, and on the quality of living of cities that have strong inclusion laws and supportive processes for LGBTQIA people. And it translates to greater innovation. It attracts people with a greater talent and skills. And there's also a correlation between quality of living. Okay. And another study, Harvard Business Review, looks at how non-discrimination laws make US states more innovative. This is a very specific study around innovation. And they found over time that adoption of employment non-discrimination acts in the US, they're called ENDA, but that's the short term for laws that would prohibit the discrimination based upon sexual orientation, gender, and gender expression. That adapting laws on that saw an 8% increase in patents and an 11% increase in patent citations. And they also tracked inventors who traveled to these states. So inventors who moved to a state that had adopted an ENDA produced 30% more patents than inventors that moved out of states with ENDAs. So before I talk about kind of the prevalence of diversity and inclusion, I want to talk a little bit more about why this is. So you saw earlier where the Harvard Business Review talked about better assessment of business risk in diverse groups. So what people often forget is that our managers every day have to make important decisions that divide, that take that organization to new heights, helps them meet or exceed business goals, or does not. And if you have a culture in your team that is worried about, in short, we call it worried about compliance, but what that means is worried about conforming to group norms that are judgmental, that are, like you have to be like your boss in order to be promoted. If they have this, where you have to conform to a certain set of standards that are either written or implied, that about 30% of your productivity across the board, your mental productivity is going to be focused on censoring what you have to say so that you're sure of risk mitigation for yourself, and you'll say what you think is going to be accepted. You won't say what you think is real. You'll say what you think is acceptable. And if you have a culture that is focused on we not only embrace and include who you are, but we celebrate who you are, where you feel like you are part of the success of the group as you are, then you will focus on what are the real risks, and you'll focus on creative solutions. You're not worried about conformance and compliance. You're actually working to make sure that what you say is non-conforming, that is creative, is out there, it's bold. And that's a key focus of performing teams, where they get higher rates of success on their decisions, and they get higher creativity, which is shown in this type of discussion. So the talk about the cause effect of this. I think most of these studies at this level, at a high level, show a correlation. I think you can find some very some very specific studies about how people think that have gone through that show a correlation to me being accepted in a group. Allows me to be more, to take more risk in what I say to a group. Certainly there is cause and effect at that level, at a psychological level. I would hesitate to say that we can, that I know the studies that show cause and effect. We definitely have strong correlations. So the next slide that I like to show is about how diversity and inclusion takes hold. This is a study done by Society for Human Resource Management. They looked at 500, they surveyed 546 global senior executives. I recall about half of them would have been called C-suite, which that's slang for saying that they have chief in their title someplace, or they're sitting on the same floor in the building as the people with chief in their title, so that's called the C-suite. And the others would have like director or higher levels. This study included about 10% of the respondents were from India. I think India is the second largest, the largest response, which I think was around 20% from the US. India was the second, and the rest were other parts of the world. And out of that survey, 23% of the companies said that leaders said that their company very strongly supported diversity and promoted diversity and inclusion. Another 32% said they strongly promoted it, and 31% said they moderately promoted it. And this was in a survey that included several subjects. So this tells you to this population, which is an important segment, they're promoting diversity and inclusion in some significant way. And basically, to me, this says that if your company is not doing or is not investing in diversity and inclusion today, then they will have to in order to survive in the not too distant future. I think we have a chance to lead in this space today. You may not be the early adopters, but you'll be a timely adopter of in your company as of diversity and inclusion. If you're don't do it soon, you're going to be lagging the trend. Okay. So I want to go back to this one just a second. There's 4 reasons that I have why diversity and inclusion works from the grassroots. You have better decisions. They are more fully informed. When you make a decision in your team, people are focused on what are the real business risks to the project, to the program, to the company. Whereas if you have a compliance and conformance focused company, the first thought about people is, will my comment be accepted? You get higher productivity through empathetic relationships. The process people go through in their head when they look at, they begin to accept people that are different from themselves, is that they look beyond those differences. And when you have a company that first celebrates diversity, so you're highlighting those differences and highlighting them in a way that's not saying this is a problem, but saying this is an opportunity, then people can get over their phobias about that particular difference and look beyond it to find what they have in common. The fact of the matter is we define ourselves and we define each other by our differences. Our jungle brain that we brought back, that we've inherited from thousands of years of evolution and survival in the jungle, automatically says people that are like me are less of a threat than people that are different from me. And that worked well in the jungle, but as we moved into civilizations, we started learning that we can expand our tribe and do more. And that's what's happening today with our with diversity and inclusion, is we are learning, we're using our frontal lobes instead of our jungle brain, and realizing that we can do much more when we include our tribe, when we increase our tribe and include more different people. And when you do that, you get past differences and you get empathetic relationships. I, as a boss, I'm a gay man, and I can have empathy for heterosexual men, or I can have empathy for a woman or a person who's struggling with raising kids at home. I can have empathy for these things because I see past the labels, I see past the difference, and I see them as a complex human being that has struggles just like I do. And oftentimes those struggles are very much the same as mine, even though on the surface we might have had labels that would keep us separate. And when you have those kind of empathetic relationships, you solve for people's needs. You don't solve for bringing them in alignment. You solve for what do they need to go forward. Right? You get better engagement. The LGBT community is known for being incredibly loyal to employers that are inclusive. I became incredibly loyal to Intuit when I worked there, and I would promote it to people wherever I went. And even though now I've moved on and grew in other ways, I still promote Intuit because it was a company that I worked for that was systematically, emphatically inclusive. And you feel 500% like you want to contribute to that company because they have gone out on a limb for you. And the last one I'll talk about here is attraction, higher quality, and retention. Those of you who are familiar with some of what's happening in the United States, there is a group called Human Rights Campaign that publishes every year a quality index. And it's evolved over the years, and it may evolve in the future. I hope it does. Things have changed, and I've seen evolution. It's changed recently. But when I first came out, it was hard to get that 100% on HRC, and companies that got it would proudly show 100% equality on HRC's equality index, and it meant something deep about their policy and practices. And many times women and men coming out of college that were looking for a place where they could excel and do and succeed, and they had choices where to go, they would pick the companies that had the 100% equality index, not even though they weren't LGBTQIA, because they felt like if this company is great on LGBTQIA, they're going to be great on me. And so that created a great deal of ability to attract people. It created greater competition for spots, which means you could select more skilled people, and they wanted to stay. There was a greater retention. Okay. And then the last slide I'll tell you is a little bit different angle. It's about happiness index. Okay, so it's if you look at the 2021 World Happiness Report and look at the top 10, and then look at the Global Diversity Readiness Index created by Society for Human Resource Management, you find a strong correlation. And if you extend this to the top 20, the correlation is even higher. Okay. So diversity inclusion removes conflict from our lives. a necessary conflict. And I think many of you that have gone this journey of kind of moving into an advocacy role for diversity and inclusion can look at your own experience and say that it has transformed you. And anecdotally, I remember a woman that worked for the company that I first, this was a woman here in India that worked for a company that I was assigned a project here in India. And she told me how happy she was that she worked for this company because it was LGBT inclusive, and that through her exposure in that company, she had learned about what LGBTQI meant and what it didn't mean. She'd seen in the leadership roles openly LGBTQIA people, and that when her son came out, she was in a position to support him. And the fact that she was in this company that was inclusive helped her take away a great deal of conflict in her life, of potential conflict in her life and that of her sons. And there's similar stories like that. Somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population of the world is predominantly attracted to the same sex. Within that is somewhere between 1 and 2% of the world that is at some level intragender. Much of those are people who are genetically intragender. We remove conflict from people's lives when we are educating people about the innate nature of being intragender and transgender. And we not only change our companies, we change our societies, and we change our families. So any questions? I'll stop the slides now. And then I can. Okay. I'm back.
Hi, Dwight. I actually had a question.
Yeah.
So, considering this is an established study with credentials from HBR and all of those things, do you think it is, in your experience, does it make a good case even in Indian context? Do you think it works when you approach a company with this data, this information? Do they understand the point? Do they take it up?
Yeah, I think so. There's, they can see the success of other companies. Now, all of us, and so have, by having empathy for even ourselves in the matter of how do we manage change, we can have some empathy for leaders of companies, but all of us are overwhelmed with the opportunity to change and the problems that we have to face every day. And company leaderships are human; they're just like us. And if you all think for a minute, there are lots of times in the day when you feel overwhelmed, and you have to prioritize. And so we all have this idea that if it's not urgent, I'm not going to deal. I don't need to deal with it today. I can think about it tomorrow. And it takes a very progressive leader that wants to worry about things that are 5 years out, to be that strategic. And it takes an aggressive HR leader in a company that very articulate and that has developed a lot of trust to be able to influence some of the leaders to realize that this is an important strategic initiative. So like all of us, there's resistance to change. We don't want to change unless there's a compelling ROI in our head to do that. And a lot of people might not see it happening in India yet. They will. And they'll see more and more of it. And I see, right now I see, diversity and inclusion pedigree on your resume is a very good thing to have right now. I see a lot of companies in India hiring, so I think it is booming a bit. But it, you can easily be in an industry that you don't see diversity and inclusion going on, and you're not seeing any of your competitors do it, and you can be a bit complacent. You can say, this is not my priority today. And so you might be pockets of, not only in India, but in the US, in Western countries, there's pockets where they are feeling like, diversity and inclusion is not that important for me today. But I would argue for them, they're being complacent and they're missing a huge opportunity to do much better and to lead in an area which is very strategic, rather than be a follower later. I just would add one more thing to that, is that when you're in for most companies, when you talk to, when you turn around and reward your stockholders and reward your employees, the difference in operating margin of 2 or 3% makes a huge difference over your competitors. If you are just 2 or 3% better in your operating budget, then you have a huge advantage. People want to invest in you because you can give 0.5% greater on your dividends. You can see that much greater of your stock growth, and more people buy your stock, you have more money to spend and make money. So I think sometimes people have a hard time seeing that. I think also one of the things that sometimes happen is that company leaders think that diversity and inclusion is a moral responsibility, which it is. I am certainly saying it is the right thing to do. And they stop at the moral responsibility and forget and don't take the time, or aren't helped enough to take the time to realize it's also a business imperative. And that takes time and investment, and people in this room can make that start to happen in their own worlds, in their own companies. So that's a long-winded answer. I'm glad you gave me a chance to say a little bit there, Pragati, but the short answer is I do see it happening in India. And I see it happening in industries that you wouldn't necessarily think it would happen in. Sometimes when we're really close, we don't see it, but I can tell you I've seen a big change in the 5 years since I've been very close to India and what's happening in India. I've seen a big change in India, and I see that change continuing.
Right, that's lovely to hear. Since you get to know about all of that, I'm not sure about the other people here, but I don't get to see those insights and that transformation happening. I have another question which might be a little tangential, but it's just coming to my mind, so I'm going to ask it. So when we typically speak about diversity and inclusion, especially in the Indian context, do you see organizations and companies also tackling other kinds of diversities, or do you see it mostly working for the LGBT community only?
So I think that's a very good question that I certainly will have some thoughts on, and there's a lot of good thoughts. I don't think diversity and inclusion happens without looking at intersectionality. But there are areas that have tremendous business potential and moral imperative that aren't being talked about yet. Certainly caste is one, and I think thanks to the work that you and your colleagues are doing. I'm hoping that there's more talk about asexuality. I think, I have seen and will say that I see more talk growing about asexuality within the LGBT community. It needs to be, and there's a whole lot more opportunity that needs to be out there. But people need to see the room in the LGBTQIA community to be who they are, and not try to conform that, I need to be a muscle Mary, or I need to be, super masculine, or that they can be who they are and find other people that are both similar and different from them, that are accepting. And that, I think, is changing in the LGBT community. I hope that changes more in the corporate community. Organizations like yours are critical to that. I think we're also still have to deal with economic disadvantage. I think there's still opportunity to do a lot more in the area of caste and of racial differences, of skin color, hair color. All of those things are dimensions that aren't being talked about. I think that as much as they can be, and as much as would bring great business productivity if they were. Likewise, I think we've just started to touch the disability and different ability community, the neurodiversity community. I think there's a huge opportunity to go there. And I'll just add one more thing, is that I don't think the discussion on diversity and inclusion will ever end. I don't think that it is a place we will arrive and have achieved everything. The more we grow, the more we're going to be able to differentiate differences, the more our disenabling systems will become visible, and the more we will have the language and the understanding and to fix that, make those better. And so, it's a great and a rewarding field to be in, and the opportunity is never going to stop. We're always going to be able to be better and get more business impact out of being more diverse, inclusive, and making people feel belong, driving equity. We're always going to have great opportunity there. It will always be interesting, and we'll be able to bring great benefits to our companies.
Great. On that amazing note, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to take a break before we begin the leadership session at 7. We have a few comments, Kathas, agreeing with what's being spoken about.
Sorry, Pragati, to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I actually had one more question. I don't know whether this is relevant or not, but in one of my lectures during my studies, my professor had literally, I don't know what kind of comment I had passed, but she had attacked me that, the culture, the generation that you people are living in, neoliberalism plays a huge role. And that makes capitalism palatable with, slapping on this branding and marketing about diversity, or any social justice cause for that matter, to give the working class the illusion of progress. And this is often this often happens by asking people to rely on the very systems that are oppressing them. I'm still thinking about what she had said, but I wanted to know your inputs, if you had any, Dwight, on that comment that she had passed.
Sure, I appreciate that. I guess I'll use what we talk about in what I talk about, people who want to drive change in our society. and how you manage change is that there's a lot of systems that want us to be very polarized. And they do that because that we get upset by being polarized. We are more likely to view a TV, something that shocks us is more interesting to us oftentimes than something that is we just accept as everyday. And so media, as you know, has certainly become more diverse in many ways, as having us talk less with each other. And I think the whole debate between the left and the right tends to be one of or. You're either one or the other. I view my, kind of my own personal values as being very much about equality, very much about distribution of opportunity. But I think that in order to make change, you have to look for the and. People who don't necessarily have to make change are often, will stick on the sides and say, this group is lazy and we shouldn't give them access to our system until they get some ambition. And the other group is going to say, this group is locked out of that system. And so we shouldn't engage with that system until they include this group. And those are two polarized views that aren't going to make change because they're giving you an or question. When you want to make change, somehow you have to bring those together. Both systems have to change. There has to be a believable change on the system to be more inclusive, and there has to be a believed change on this side that inspires the person to take a risk that they haven't taken before and want to engage with that system. Corporations are going to be around here for a long time. And when a corporation, does, I hear, the talk about rainbow washing all the time, where that just, these people are branding them because it's our movement and they're stealing our movement because they want to look like they're inclusive. And that's, to me, that's a blaming and a distancing answer to that question. The better answer would be to recognize that the fact that somebody is putting a rainbow brand on something during Pride Month represents the fact that they think it's important enough to put a rainbow brand out there for people to see. There's not some master conspiracy going on or system that's to impress, to oppress the oppressed people. It might do that. And we all have this bias towards sustaining our status quo. But that fact that somebody is putting that rainbow up is an opportunity for discussion. We need to, as a community, create a discussion that says, okay, it's nice and great that you think that being LGBT inclusive is important, and you want to see the world as, see the world to see you as being LGBT inclusive. Let's have a conversation about how you can really be LGBT inclusive and how that will help your business and help you be a better citizen of this country. And look for those and solutions where it works for both sides. And that's what that rainbow washing, to me, represents. Our corporations doing everything they need to engage populations that are systematically excluded from participating. Absolutely, they are not doing enough. We as people are not doing enough. And so, my point would be is figure out how to make it better from where it is today. Figure for that and solution. Worry less about feeling right in your analysis and do more about trying to make it better. I hope that helps.
Yes, it certainly did. It also made me question whether we can actually question all these corporations about what kind of course, they are supporting the diversity and inclusion, be it part of their branding or marketing or whatever, hopping off on the trend, or genuinely believing that, this needs to be discussed or not. How can we ask them these questions about what more are they doing to make their company more diverse or inclusive, and how can we differentiate that they're not doing it just to increase their profits or make it look like they're just doing it because it's a trend or they want to be seen as a morally responsible company.
Okay, so that's a really good question, and I think that there are lots of things that can be done. The first thing I really think can happen that would be really good would be there needs to be a very transparent, a very authoritative index for being inclusive. It would be best if it's driven by perhaps a correlation. It needs to be both academic and business supported. It would be best if it's not driven. There's a lot of diversity and inclusion companies out there that give awards every year. And whether it's true or not, they're always viewed with the bias that these companies are giving the award to their big donors or their big customers. And I think to have credibility, that you need to have an index out there that measures it in a very credible way, and people need to rally behind that. That would be one idea. I think highlighting opportunities and highlighting best practices. We can do more to show which companies are doing good things and the good acts of good things. Oftentimes, the whole corporate social responsibility budget is done without much publicity, and we can do more to highlight companies that are doing good things, make those things that are actually being done compete in the media with the rainbow colors going on brands. So there's a huge opportunity there. A lot of these companies have D&I people that can be assessed, can be accessed. You can get to and talk to, and I think that you have to learn how that system works and get into it, and that might take take some time to figure out, but there are ways you can, lots of different ways you can influence companies and engage with them. And highlighting bad things they do is part of that. I don't say we shouldn't highlight when companies make decisions that really hurt people, whether it has to do with water rights, or I think those, whatever it is, those things should be highlighted and talked about. I think we can also highlight the good things.
Yeah, I really like the point that you made about the CSR department in all these corporations, because most of what I've heard, and this is of course just from my family members, so I don't know how true is it, but most of the people who work at these corporations have told me that these departments do not even have their own section. They just work under human resources, and most of the time they have their own connections with the social causes, so they don't really put that many efforts into the department at all. Like, they just have, even within the CSR departments, they're looking for a social cause or for some project that's eventually it benefits them or gives them the profit. So
I think that corporations are like politicians. They want to be around tomorrow. They need to be pragmatic. If politicians don't get donations, if they don't get support from somebody, then they're going to not be around tomorrow. And so you might go into politics being all truistic and want to make the best change in the world. But if you're going to survive, you've got to be able to survive in that system. And so the way to influence a corporation is to look for that and. How can they help their brand, help their business, and help the community? And there's always an and. There too often our jungle brain wants us to go in and say there's an or, where you can either be socially responsible or you can help your business, when there's a whole bunch of ways, if we just are creative and think about it, when you can do both.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that input. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with what Dwight is saying. It's something that I've only started realizing much later. Of course, I started from a place of idealism and eventually realized that the world is a little more practical than I had initially thought, and now it makes sense. And the second point that I wanted to make was also, I don't know, it might sound controversial, and I wonder what everybody else thinks about it, but we constantly keep seeing that. I'm not talking about Dwight's work, because Dwight's work is within the corporate circle. So that's a different world. But in my world, I keep seeing LGBT always being portrayed as this charity cause. And I think it does more harm than good. Again, something open for discussion maybe, but I feel like LGBT people or the LGBT community or the cause or the work that needs to be done for this does not always have to be a charity case, does not always have to be a beneficiary kind of a relationship where we're asking for alms in a way. I don't know if that's making sense to anybody else, but I just wanted to put it out there because it's on my mind. Thanks.
Yeah. So anybody want to take, I'd love to see what the group thinks about that.
I think I would like to conclude that the group agrees.
Yeah, well, and I think I in a way supported that when I talk about it's much more than a moral imperative. It's much more than a kindness that we ought to be doing. It's a business imperative, and it has great impact. And the intersectionality there, you get a team that is much more accepting of LGBT people, and you create a muscle in them that they can now be empathetic towards someone who's neurodiverse. And instead of focusing on their irritation because this person's talking all the time or whatever, they can look past that and focus on what are they doing and how can you help them do more of it that is helping the company, that's helping the team. That I think that is part of why diversity and inclusion is so important, and you can't forget about how much it intersects with everything else.
Absolutely, Dwight. I have so much more that I could say about that, but I do think you need a break. Yes. And you'd also scheduled for one. So please take your break and let us know when you'll be back, and we're all going to be ready for the workshop.
Okay. What do you guys want? Shall we say back at 7:15?
Sure. Okay. 7:15 it is then. 7:15 we start with the workshop on finding your voice.
Okay. I'll sign out for a few minutes.
Sure. We'll see you. Katha, can you stop the live in the meanwhile?